Hello.
Hello.
We're here to answer a question and a larger topic.
We're here
to answer
a
a question. So I've gotten a couple variations of questions like this around therapy, the process of therapy. Somebody asked about where can they find a good therapist? How do you find somebody who works in the way that you and I work? I feel like there's been a lot of questions around therapy, which I feel like we can maybe cover a couple of those in this conversation. But the question that I'm going to read as kind of the kickoff. So a woman asked, she herself is a therapist, and she said, as a therapist, I struggle with helping people when the other person is not receptive to the conversation, feelings expressed, or vulnerability. No changes come from the conversation. And then what? And then she just wrote, then what again with like 2 question marks. Ah, yes, being a therapist.
Well, I guess I would say to the person asking the question, my love, what is the outcome you are seeking from your client, right? Like there's, I'm trying to like think back on the things that you just named that she was describing from her client, but like no vulnerability, no
changes made. I just deleted it. Deleted the screenshot.
No vulnerability, no changes in something. I don't know. Yeah, I think, what's a little bit different in terms of like, I believe the way that we were trained to think about
not receptive to the conversation.
not receptive to this conversation. I would, if it were me and I were you in this situation, I would be really curious about what this client is evoking within me, why this client was sent to me, and why. Meaning, if we think about it from a depth psychology perspective, I believe that like no client is sent to us by accident. And the fact that this client feels really difficult to tolerate feels like a part of your assignment. Like I remember when we were still in school and we were each in our practicum, we would have people in our class that would be describing clients they were working with that I would just be like eyes wide. Like I would have no idea what to do with that client if that client came through my door, like almost like terrified, like, oh my God, that scenario would like, I would just be dumbfounded. And I remember our teacher at the time saying, and that probably won't be your client because if you are not equipped to sit with someone in whatever stage of life they are in, that will not be like psyche will not bring that person to you. That will not be sort of your divine assignment. And I have not, in all of the years that I've been doing this work, not found that one, either that was the case, that I wasn't in some way like able to be present for or show up for the person that was sitting across from me. Or if for whatever reason it wasn't a good vibrational match, that person fell away almost immediately. And so it's like there's just like a knowing between both of us. But since that hasn't been the case for this client, I would be really curious about my own process and my own countertransference, which for those of you who are not in the world of therapy, that basically means like I am sort of like having projections that I am putting on this person. I am having things that are evoked within me that feel really difficult to tolerate. And that becomes my inner work to do so that I can be really curious about like what this person is showing me about me.
Yeah, I think this is why one of the hills I'm willing to die on is really that therapists should forever and ever, amen, be in their own therapy and or some kind of consultation, because we're humans, right? And we inevitably are going to have things come up and we're going to have struggles with our clients or with our life that we need somebody to help, hold our hand as well. I remember I was in group supervision when I was still in school. And I remember this one guy that was in my group that went to a different school than we did because our school, it was mandatory that you were in therapy. You had to actually have the hours signed off on. He had said he'd never been in therapy before and he was becoming a therapist. And I was horrified. And as you know about me, I do not hide my facial expressions very well. And he was so like, I don't understand what the big deal is. And I looked at him and I said, and I say this frequently, but I'm like, let me ask you a question. Would you go see a dentist who had bad teeth? He's like, "What?" And I'm like, "If your dentist had rotting teeth falling out of their head, would you let them touch your teeth?" And he was like, "No, of course." And I'm like, "How is that any fucking different? Like, you just can't see it, right?" The point is like, if you're not doing your own work and you're not looking at your shit, who are you to come in and sit in that chair that a lot of people look to as like an authority figure, which you and I would disagree that that's what the case is, right? But a lot of people see therapy like that. Um, and so I just think it's so imperative that we're doing our own work because things like this happen, blind spots happen. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that even people coming into my practice who for sure pretty quickly I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like a good fit. Um, it's to your point, it's fallen away either on its own or I have recognized really early on, like, oh, there's actually learning in this for me too.
Mm.
And some of that learning has been, I don't know, speaking up about why I don't think this is a good fit and then referring them out, which like for a recovering people pleaser is really hard to do, you
Mhm.
know? Listen, you're hearing it here from a therapist. Like, I just want everybody to like me and I want to be the person for everybody. Like, that is that recovering people pleaser. And that shit's in me, even as a therapist. And so sometimes the work for me is actually to say, I don't feel like I'm the right person for you, but I feel like I've got somebody who you might really work with well and say that, which feels to me like a hard thing to say, you know?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but like I really like, I think this idea of like a hierarchical, and listen, there's always power dynamics because there's
Hmm.
a vulnerability
Hmm.
when someone comes in and is sharing aspects of their life with you, and it's not like a reciprocal dynamic. But I think this idea of like therapists, physicians, like whoever the person is, having in any way figured out anything that you have not is silly season. And I
Yeah.
would argue, even with the example you were giving, like the bad teeth's not the best example, me, because like that sort of is like I've fixed my teeth versus like if you were in a hot yoga class, right? You know what the sensations of what that is when it's hard, when the heat is turned up, when you're dying, when you're really struggling. And if you've never done hot yoga, like, why would you be teaching hot yoga? Because you can't really, like, empathize with that person's feeling, right? Like, to me, that's the, like, can you empathize with what this is like for this
That's
person
more
to
what I was
be.
saying is like,
Yeah,
if
I
this
know, I'm
person's
just
never been
joking.
in the dental chair, they don't know what it feels
Well,
like
you
to
said
be
bad
a
teeth.
patient.
I'm
Well,
like,
I mean, I say that because it's like, or like a hairdresser has bad hair. My point is, it's like, it's something you can see. And so that person has never sat in the chair as the client, right? And so if
yeah.
they've never sat in the chair as the client, would you want them to actually be the person working on you? Air quotes. To me, that's the reason why I use that visual because it's like, to me, that's an indicator that you don't know what it feels like to sit in the chair of the client, right? And you need to know, to your point, as a hot yoga teacher, like you need to know what that feels like because then who are you to stand up there and, tell somebody what they should and shouldn't be doing, which you shouldn't be doing anyway as a therapist, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes, well, I was just joking, but the reason I said that about hot yoga was more that, like, as someone who taught hot yoga, like, it will always be hard for me. It will always like, I will never be at a point of arrival. Every time I step into a hot yoga room, I will struggle through that hour plus whatever amount of time, and I think that's the way that a therapist who's like really like, you know, being honest with themselves and not sort of projecting that
Mm,
like any of this is not something like we're always going to struggle through because it's life. Now, listen, I think we can certainly build muscles. I think, to the point you were making before, we can do less people pleasing and things like that than we have in the past. But I think it's really important to like put down the like idea that if we circle back to this person's question, like they're not getting anywhere, where would you like them to
yeah.
get?
Yeah.
This is their like life's path. And I certainly don't know what's right for any of my clients, nor frankly, do I have any buy in or investment in what happens with my clients' lives.
Hmm.
It's their life. So I think sometimes our work as therapists is to really check, where we have like a desired outcome for
Hmm.
someone that's really not for us to own.
And this is why I say that the helping professions are overrun with wildly codependent people. It's not
Well,
that the motivation's not bad. I mean, obviously, we're caring people we want to help. And
mhm,
a lot of people in the helping professions also think that, they know what's best. They know the direction that somebody should take. They are going to get in there and fix it.
mhm.
Which is a very codependent way of being in relationship to other people. And that's another reason, circling back to going to your own therapy, that's why it is so important because you know this story, and people who come to my retreats have heard it a million times, but another supervision story for me, I had a client who to me felt very similar to what this person was writing in, where I just felt like I kept going in and I was trying all the things and she like wasn't listening and she wasn't doing the things that I was suggesting. She
Mm.
wasn't air quote getting better or whatever that means. And I kept coming into supervision and you know, then this person would like give me this way. What about this? Have you thought about this? And I went to another supervising group because I had two supervisors at the time and it was very different than the one I had been going to. He said to me, I'm going to ask you this question and I'm going to ask it like this because, and he said to me, quote, you're a New Yorker, so I know you can handle it. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. And he
Mm.
said, let me ask you, who the fuck do you think you are? And for a lot of people, I always jokingly say the reason why he preemptively said the New Yorker thing is because a lot of people, they'd be like, that would be way too harsh. But I was like, I heard it and it still
Mm.
is something I use as a tool. His point is like, you're not God. He said that to me. Like, you are not God. You do not get to decide what healing looks like, what this person's path should be, right? To your point, like what this outcome is. It's not your life, right? You are meant to be there as one point of light on somebody's journey, and that is it, right? You're there to be maybe one point of contention or one point of friction or one whatever that one point is, but that's it. You're one point on somebody's journey. You are not their journey. You are not them, right? And I think that for a lot of therapists and people in the healing professions, we get a lot of identity out of being the savior.
Mhm.
And so when we are not able to fix and save, by the way, not just people we work with, but our partners, our children, our family members, our friends, it's like we take it as like a personal affront to our identity. And that, my friend, is codependency work 101. So,
Yeah. And the other thing I would even, in addition to that, is I think that there's a way, and this is something like that I have had to like really, and this is where my therapist is someone who is useful in my life. There's a way that like when we, how do I say this? When we have a perspective, and I want to name like this is a very human thing. Like we're not
mhm,
going to like be able to shut off like say we're watching things within a family member or a best friend or something that like we just don't agree with. There are ways that we can as humans um like sort of get into this way of like manipulating the outcome that we
mhm,
desire from the people in our life, either like withholding our energy or like showing a deep sense of contempt that shames that person. And as a therapist, you have an unbelievable opportunity for that type of coercive
mm,
manipulation. And I think that that's a lot of times
yeah,
what like keeps people hesitant about
mhm,
therapy. It's like, I don't want someone in my head. I don't want someone, sort of like manipulating me. And there's like, I mean, we could get into the whole history of how like people actually
mhm,
did use those things in abusive ways based on like societal constructs of like ways that like, you know, therapy was used to sort of weaponize things against women or people of color. And that's like why a lot of times people still will not step into a therapist's office today. So, all that to say, I think that there's an ethical responsibility as
mhm,
well to really check in with like, where are you having a perspective on what this person needs to do? And that if I am in some way like feeling entitled to impose that, that can be in the
mhm,
realm of like do no harm, that like you need to
mhm,
check that. You need to like suss that out and process that with someone else so they can like give you a little bit of perspective that you may not be seeing because you're too close to it.
yeah, amen. Yeah, I did a video a long time ago about like somebody asked what are some of the questions that I should be asking when I'm like interviewing therapists.
Mm.
And first and foremost, that in and of itself, that language I think is great because I think it's important to remember that you are actually interviewing therapists. It is a little bit like dating. Like there has to be a shared kind of energy, a shared vibe.
Mhm.
And it's not you have the ability to ask questions, you have the ability to kind of vet people. Um, and that is kind of your responsibility to do for yourself before you get enter into a relationship with a therapist or enter into a relationship. And like a couple of sessions in, if you're like, I'm not feeling this, then that's fine, right? That happens. It's still a human to human connection. But one of the questions that I frequently tell people is I think you should ask a therapist flat out, can you tell me a little bit about some of the personal therapy work that you've done, or that
Mm.
are you currently in your own therapy? And I've gotten some responses from therapists that are like, wow, they ask that. I can't, why would you have them ask that question? And I'm like, why are you holding secrets? Like,
Why are you acting like going to therapy is a shameful thing that we can't talk openly about?
exactly. And so I actually do think that's a really good vetting question when you're looking for therapists, is asking them what their experiences, with therapy is. Um, I also like to ask, like, what are some of the modalities that are interested in or work with? I think making sure that somebody has a similar background, like people come to us or to me and they'll say, like, how do I find a therapist similar to you guys? Well, I would say, depth psychology is still, unfortunately, hopefully it's not forever, still a little bit more of a niche kind of
Mm,
approach, right? But if that's something you desire, you are going to have to do a little bit more work to find somebody that's more through the spiritual psychology lens, through the depth psychology lens, or somebody who's Jungian, or somebody, and so knowing that stuff can also be really helpful for you, I think, to find somebody who maybe you feel is a little bit more in alignment with what
yeah.
you're looking for.
I think that's a really good point, V. And I think, regardless of the orientation or the way that any therapist practices, I think it's just like a really important reminder to, like, that you do get to ask questions. And if
Hmm.
something doesn't resonate that a
Hmm.
therapist says to you, you are always your own, you
Advocate.
know, inner authority. Like,
Yep.
there's just like, I mean, just remember, Glennon Doyle's therapist told her to give her husband blowjobs. So she didn't have to have sex with him for the rest of her life. And you
Amen.
would think that's like a rare occurrence and let me tell you, like, there are a whole lot of therapists that we'll just say would not be in alignment with what Vanessa and I might have in terms of perspectives of what you should say to your clients. But if something just does not feel true or resonate for you, that's all you need. Like,
Hmm.
this person is not the authority on your life. You
Hmm.
are.
Yeah, and I would say for anybody like me who tends to be somebody who in like my past life would just like cut and bail really quickly instead of like having to have the hard conversation or say the hard thing. If something feels out of alignment or they say something that feels not like true for you, I would challenge you to speak up and say it to them before
Mm,
anything, because a lot of times that's the hardest thing to do, right? Um, and I mean, we're not talking about like abusive things. In that case, fuck them, just cut and run. But if somebody challenged you on something, or somebody has an opinion that don't appreciate, I would push you as the client to have that hard conversation with that therapist, because what a
mm,
lot of people don't realize is that the relationship itself, right? Any of the research that's been done on the effectiveness of therapy, the efficacy of therapy, has proven time and again that it's actually the relationship itself that is the most healing component to
mhm,
therapy. And part of what we're recreating in that therapy room is what an idea of like a healthy, vulnerable relationship could potentially look and sound like. And so, for example, if you have a hard time being vulnerable or communicating your feelings in your, let's say, partnership, you're not just going to magically be able to easily communicate, hurt feelings to your therapist. Yeah, we know that's great. That's part of the work,
mm,
right? So if this person hurts your feelings, part of your work is to tell them that they hurt your feelings, right? Which is like a whole other conversation. But I just think that that's like important to remind people, is that part of therapy is actually saying the hard thing to your therapist. We know that. We're prepared for that. That's part of our job, is to be able to hold that and to kind of welcome that in. We actually want you to challenge us sometimes. We want you to bring that stuff to us, because that's where some of like the best growth happens.
mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so hard to do for all
So,
of us.
my God, so hard to do.
Yeah.
People pleasers unite. All right, y'all. Well, thanks for listening, and be well.